I just want to thank all of our user groups, not only Queen City, but our local host user group here in Orlando. I mean, they had a user group meeting on Tuesday night. I'm told it was extremely well attended. But as you know, we are all enthusiastic and passionate about .NET Nuke, and we love our jobs. We love working on the platform, but we also like to have fun. And thank you for bringing all the excitement and the fun and the passion and everything that you've shown over the last couple of days. Let me get a big round of applause. So, quick reminder, if you haven't picked up your poster, your t-shirt, or your training certificate, this is your last chance. Make sure to stop by the registration desk before you go home. We're not shipping anything to you, so make sure you pick it up while you're here. So, based on the massive wave of next-generation server and web development tools that's being released by Microsoft this year, coupled with our release of a client services development model in DNN 7.0, we thought, who better than Scott Hunter from Microsoft to come give a keynote presentation this afternoon. And Scott has been with Microsoft on the web platform and tools team as principal program manager for the past 5 years, working on .NET 3.5, 4, and now 4.5, plus ASP.NET Web Forms, Web Pages, Razor Syntax, MVC, and most recently, Web API. Scott has an enlightening and instructive presentation that he's going to give to us this afternoon that covers the latest developments in Web Forms and Web API and client-side development. So please join me in welcoming Scott Hunter.
How's it going, guys? This is a great conference. It was funny when he was introducing me, I was thinking about, normally on these things I list my team, and I've been at Microsoft for quite a while now, and since I joined, I was part of ASP.NET, then I was part of Web Platform and Tools, then I was part of Azure Application Platform and Tools, then I'm part of Azure, and who knows what I'll be next year. So it's kind of the weirdness of Microsoft, we just change all the time. But the technology has all stayed the same. Because .NET Nuke is built on web forms, I thought I'd just kind of go through a history of all the various frameworks we've built over the years. We released web forms in 2001. That's the framework that most of .NET Nuke is based on. I assume you guys are all familiar with it. We released MVC in 2008 and kind of confused people with that. Anybody in here use MVC? See, not very many. Funny thing about MVC is, especially if you come from the web form background, is we introduced MVC in 2008, and a lot of folks thought that because this is kind of the negative of Microsoft is whatever the last thing we released is the thing you should be working on, and you should not use any of the stuff that we released before, which is so untrue, because we're still supporting all this stuff, and I'm going to show today that we have a lot of stuff in web forms that we're working on, and if you actually want to follow that venue. We just released Web API this year, and we're going to release a product called Signalr later this year. And you can't even build web apps with those. So I don't even know if everybody's going to take that same MVC mentality and try to replace what we did. I thought I'd just quickly highlight, you're going to know the first one already, so Web Forms. It's one of our frameworks for building applications. It's got great drag and drop support, rich composable controls, which allows you to build these components. That's why it's great for CMS package like .NET Nuke, because you can build these components that you just stick and plug in everywhere. It's event-driven, and it's got this model binding feature, which I'll talk about later. It's a feature in 4.5. MVC is a very different pattern, and you won't find a lot of CMSs built on MVC. It's built on what's called the model view controller pattern. And the idea here is that your model is your database logic stuff. Your view is just the HTML. It doesn't have any logic in it at all. Very different than a web form application where you've got events and stuff wired in your actual markup file. And your controller is supposed to like grab stuff from the model and make it available to the view. Now, everybody talks about MVC, says, oh, it's great for testability, and it's great for the separation of concerns, but only if you use it the right way. You can do all these same things in web forms today, so pros and cons. I mean, if everybody says it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, I don't know if I'd buy that. You can do the same things in web forms, so I think they're actually very equivalent. And I'm going to show today that anything that we've added to MVC that we've not added to web forms, as of ASP.NET 4.5, we've added back to web forms. And this is a new one that we just came out with as part of the Visual Studio 2012 ASP.NET 4.5 release. And this is something called ASP.NET Web API. And what Web API is about is building HTTP endpoints that can be used by devices. Why we think Web API is interesting is, we all live in a world of, you all probably have smartphones. You might have a tablet. The whole idea behind Web API is building a single interface that you can then expose and can be consumed by a tablet, can be consumed by a smartphone, can be consumed by a thick web application, a client-side web application. So this is kind of the model that we think things are moving to. We've had a variety of offerings in this area. If you look at like RPC type stuff, we have things like WCF that we have remoting in .NET that does these same things. One of the differences about those and Web API is something like WCF, it's all about sending like a message. And you don't know anything about the actual transport that got the message to you. With Web API, we know the transport is HTTP, and we actually want to give you that transport. The reasons we want to do stuff like that is you might have a Web API for, say you have a contact application, and you got an API called GET, and you pass it an ID, and it returns the user as JSON. Well, because we're on HTTP, if you actually tell us that your content type is image, we can return you the image of the user as part of the content. If you tell us you want JSON, we'll give you the fields of the user as JSON. And so we get a lot of capabilities because we can expose and live on top of HTTP. And another cool thing about Web API is all the features, I'm going to talk about this model binding feature we have in web forms. That same feature also is in MVC and also is in Web API. And that's basically how we take data that comes to ASP.NET and convert that back into an object, or on the way out, take an object and convert it back to text or XML or whatever your content type is. So we think this will be an area where we have a lot of investment in the future. And then a product that we've announced but we haven't actually shipped, it's going to ship in December, is called ASP.NET Signalr. And Signalr is all about what we call real-time applications. The most canonical real-time application is a chat app where you type and a bunch of people type and see each other's text. But more common or more businessy type things are you have a stock ticker and you've got a bunch of clients with smartphones, and when they have your app open, every time the stock changes, you want that to update. When I think of .NET Nuke, when I think of one of the things that Sean was showing this morning, he had that example where as people started interacting and stuff, there was a counter that was increasing on the top of the web page. This is exactly the kind of thing that you can do with Signalr. And Signalr is pretty cool because it takes advantage of all the latest technologies. If you're on a platform and a client that actually support HTML5, it'll use HTML5 for its real-time updates. That means that it'll keep a socket open, and so it's very cheap for it to push an update out to everybody because it's got a socket open to everybody. If you're on a device that doesn't support HTML5, what it will do is it'll use a mechanism where it polls, but it tries to keep something open. So it'll keep a socket and try to poll what we call long polling. The cool thing for you as a developer is you don't have to think about long polling or HTML5 Web Sockets or whatever. You just program Signalr, and it just works. The other cool thing is one of our goals with Signalr is we want to do mass scale. And when I think of mass scale, I think of, imagine you got a game on an Xbox, and you're playing the game on the Xbox with your controller. Wouldn't it be cool if you could actually have a tablet sitting in your lap, and that tablet in your lap actually showed the map in real time as you played the game? That's the kind of stuff that we're targeting our scale up to be. And so if you combine Signalr plus some stuff we're going to do in Azure, we're going to show it at the Build conference in about 2 weeks. We're going to show you how you can take Signalr, and it scales quite well on your own machine. But if you want to scale it across 20 or 30 machines, we can do that in Azure and scale to that million kind of timeline. So what I like to say is we have people when we think of ASP.NET, think of this, it's either web forms or it's MVC or whatnot. If you really think about it, it's a bunch of technologies that sit on a core, which is ASP.NET, and you're going to hear us say more in the future. We have this notion of what we call one ASP.NET, and that's kind of what we're driving towards. In fact, next year, if you install, we'll have an update next year to Visual Studio, and that update when you say file new project, you won't get a choice of choosing an MVC project or a web forms project. You get the choice of choosing an ASP.NET project. And you can basically use all these technologies together in the same application. So what I thought I would do now is quickly just recap and show the stuff that we did in Visual Studio 2012 and ASP.NET 4.5, and then I'll roll in and do some demos. So do people in here that build .NET Nuke plugins and stuff use Visual Studio? Anybody? Anybody using Visual Studio 2012 yet? Few? So one of the coolest features in Visual Studio 2012 is it supports what we call round tripping. And that means if you or the one person on your team wants to try Visual Studio 2012 without having the rest of your team migrate to Visual Studio 2012, when you open a project in Visual Studio 2012, it does not change your project, meaning that you can still open it in Visual Studio 2010. So this has been the most requested feature in Visual Studio for the last 6 years. And it was also the feature that was cut within the first week of every release for the last 6 years. I think that was like some management people thinking that people would upgrade faster if it did not let you do this. But I disagree and think you'll upgrade faster if you can actually try it and not break everything. Another thing is, and I'll show some of this, is support for modern standards through our product. HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, all the way through Visual Studio. All of our editors fully support these things now. ASP.NET fully supports these things. So that's kind of a push we're making. We've got a feature called Page Inspector, which I think is actually really cool in the .NET Nuke scenario. Page Inspector is kind of a way to debug your HTML or debug your markup. And one of the things that's cool about it is it can find your markup and find you actually what code in your application created the markup. So if you're in like something like .NET Nuke that could have tons of nested controls and pages and master pages and stuff all over the place, well, I'll actually demo this. As I move my mouse over the elements, the actual source code that's related to what my mouse is over will actually open in the editor. And that's because we actually instrument markup as it goes out to the page, and we can actually look at instrumentation and show you that. And then since most of the stuff you guys do in here is based on web forms, I'm going to show some great stuff where in the past, if you want to do any kind of editing of creating events, showing properties, bringing up the Chrome for controls, you actually had to go into design mode. We now actually surface all of that in the text editor, and we've got some great new publishing features as well. If I look at ASP.NET, we did quite a few things in there. Are people aware of NuGet? I always think when I go to these conferences that very few people know actually what NuGet is, and I'll show it as well. NuGet is a great way of finding libraries and finding code that you can use as part of your project. And then we can use, via tooling, we can insert it into your project for you and take it back out if you don't want it or provide updates. And we've actually based all of our templates on this now, so our templates are actually live and can change on the fly. We did a lot of work around doing what we call web optimization. I'm sure .NET Nuke has its own internal solution for this today, but if you look at web applications, as you add more components and stuff to them, you find that you're referencing lots of JavaScript files, lots of CSS files. How can we make your page faster? Well, we can combine all the JavaScript, combine all the CSS, minify it, so that's built into the framework now. Huge feature in ASP.NET 4.5 and just .NET 4.5 in general is we have a new way of programming asynchronously. When I look at web servers, people always ask me, is ASP Net Fast? And typically, ASP Net's not the problem. Most of your time is not being spent in ASP.NET itself. We just generate text. Most of your time is waiting on some resource, be it a web API or a database call or something like that. And .NET's always had support for asynchronous calls, but they've been very hard to do. And so we have this great new keyword called await that allows you to write code just like you do today. You might have code that says, run a database query, run a database query, run a database query. If you were going to convert that to async, you'd have spaghetti and stuff all over the place. With this new await keyword, you can actually write the code the same way you do today. Just database call, database call, database call, and we can run them all together in parallel at the same time. So I think that's really cool. HTML5 Web Sockets are built in. And another cool one I think that will affect everybody in the room is if you're on Windows Server 2012 and .NET 4.5, you get the most benefits, but you get a lot of these without both of those. Our startup time is about 30% faster, and our memory footprint's about 30% smaller. So we did a lot of optimizations around perf. When I look at web forms, we made sure that all of our web forms support HTML5. So what I mean by that is if you have like a text box, you can now set it to each of the HTML5 text box modes that exist, and we'll generate the correct markup. This is really important when you're building apps for mobile, because most mobile devices will actually see those and behave differently on an iPhone or whatever. If you set a text box to date time, you'll get a date picker. If you're on a device that doesn't support that, you'll just get a regular box like you always have. So it doesn't hurt you to use it. Strongly typed data controls. This is something that MVC's had for a long time. A model's passed in MVC, and via that model, you can do data binding with your data controls and stuff, and get errors at design time. Web forms has always done loosely bound data controls, where you don't actually find out if you bound incorrectly until you actually run the application, because it's all done at runtime. We have this great feature in MVC called model binders, and we're bringing that into web forms as well. And I'll do a demo of that in a few minutes, and that's basically how we take an object, put it into your web page, and then take it back out. And then finally, another MVC feature we had is something we call unobtrusive JavaScript validation, and that's just a way of, when we're doing client-side validation, not putting as much markup into your page. And so the thing I like people to take away from is those last three items: strongly typed data controls, model binders, and unobtrusive JavaScript, basically bring web forms fully up to the feature set that we have in MVC. So there is no difference in capabilities, and that's on purpose. That's one of our goals. So I think what I was going to do next was jump and do some demos. So let me hide this away. Let me actually start my thing here. So I've got first off, since I'm in Visual Studio 2012, I want to show a couple features in Visual Studio 2012 that I think are really cool. When I'm demoing at conferences, one of the first things I always want to do is like change my font to something that you guys can actually see. I don't know if my font's actually set to something you guys can see right now, but if it's not, it doesn't look like it is. So we got this great feature. Before, you would actually have to dig through Visual Studio and actually find where these kinds of settings are. Now I can just do things like, I can go up to this quick window here, type font. There's the font dialog. Bump my size up, save. So via quick launch, any setting that you think you might want to find. If I want to format new lines in C#, just type new line, and it'll basically show me where the option is, and I can go right to that. And so it just shows that it's very easy in the tool to find stuff. You don't have to go dig through all these tools options now to go find these options. Just type what you want in quick launch, and we'll get you there. Same thing is the Solution Explorer has been modified quite a bit as well. It's actually, I can now drill into my code directly from Solution Explorer. So there's a couple features here. One is if I just click on something, I can preview the text for that window. I'm not actually opening the window. I'm just highlighting with my cursor. As I move around, you'll see the window is opening, and I can look at it. But it's not actually open. You might notice the tab is on the right side here. If I actually double-click the file, it'll open up on the left side as a real file. So as you move around the Solution Explorer, you can actually kind of just open and view files. I can also just drill in now. I can drill in and say, here's my About page. I'll drill into the About class. There's my load method. Go right to my load method. So instead of having to like bring a class view up or something like that, you can actually navigate all the way down via the Solution Explorer. This goes even further. Just like that quick launch has that great search, I can do that same search in Solution Explorer. So I type page load. It shows my page load events for all my pages. If you knew a method you were looking for, just search for it here, find it easily, click and open it. So that's some of the cool stuff we've done in Visual Studio. Talked about round tripping already. Let's talk about, I've got one more I want to show here. So let's say you have a page and you want to open the page in browsers. What we do now is we go out and find all the browsers on your computer and display them in our box here. But I can also come down here. There's actually a bug in this. That's why Chrome doesn't show up. It'll be fixed in an update that's coming in November. Not on purpose. Chrome 21 changed their strings in the registry, and that's why we miss them now. But I can select multiple browsers, and then it'll basically, we'll launch multiple browsers and let you actually view in a lot of browsers at once. So I'll close that down. And I will show some HTML stuff now. So let's jump in this application. Let's actually run it for fun. Now, when I'm running this application, I'm looking around. You might notice that the word contact is underlined for some reason. So I've got some bug in my HTML. How would I find that? What I can do with Visual Studio 2012 is, let me run my application. But when I run it, I'm going to say view it in Page Inspector. Let me hide some of these windows away. Now bumping that font up is going to come and haunt me. I don't want a breakpoint. OK, so now I'm viewing, and I can pop this window up on the projector. I don't get a lot of screen real estate, so it's kind of hard. But I can come over here and I can click this arrow. And once I click this arrow, as you might notice, as I move around, the content's changing on the browser, on the source window, to show me where the content is. I can click Contact here. I can easily see what's missing is I have an LI missing. I can go put my LI in the page. And then basically, you see it asking me it noticed that I've changed the source. And it says press Control-Alt-Enter to refresh. It'll run and refresh. My contact is now correct. And as I said, I think in the case of .NET Nuke, this ought to be spectacular. As you move around, it'll actually go and find whatever components, however they're loaded, and bring the source code up for you. At the same time, you can also use this to do things like styles. Loading. Please load. So let me inspect again. There I am on contact. I can then go see the styles that actually make up this menu. Once again, as I click one of these, I'll go over here and in my content. Let's go find a fun one here. Here's one I want. So here's another feature in the editor. I can do IntelliSense on the color in my CSS file, and I get this really cool pop-up that shows colors I can select. Make the window a little bit bigger here so you can see it easier. So it shows the colors I can select. And in the past, what we would have done is we would have randomly chosen what we think the most standard colors are. In the case of VS 2012, we actually went and parsed the CSS and found the most common colors and show those by default. So those are actually smart colors. If I want to go change them, I can actually pop down a really cool window here to change the color of my links. I can do things like opacity, make it see-through. And you can see as I do that, the tag changes to RGBA. Pretty cool stuff. So save that. And that's Page Inspector. And I think it'll be really good for, I haven't tried it with .NET Nuke, but I want to because I think it'll be really cool. So let me go back to a markup file here. Go to my default page. And you might notice that my doc type is set to XHTML 1.0. In early versions of Visual Studio, we would just randomly pick a doc type, whatever we think the latest current doc type is. What we do now is we actually do look at the page itself, and we got that because my doc type is actually set to that. If I pull this out, oops, too much deletion. Save my doc type back to HTML5. You'll notice that my doc type changed to HTML5. So the tool is actually smart now. It's actually looking at the markup and making the decision on the fly what it should do. One of my favorite features, which is a feature that you would have thought, this is my feature that we should have done like 5 years ago. I'm going to change my H3 tag. I decided that's not, I want to change it to be an H1. So I'm going to change that to H1. Did people pick that up? We know you changed the tag. Why don't we change the other side of the tag? the tags match. So if you change any tag in Visual Studio, we'll find the back tag on it and change it at the same time as you change the front tag. So that's a cool feature. Something else is, especially in the, once again, as I think of the .NET Nuke world, I think of, I might have some text in my page, and I might want to create like a user control from that. We actually have that as a feature now. I can grab all this text, can right-click on it, say extract a user control, call it .NET Nuke, or we'll call it bullet 1. So what we'll actually do is we'll rip all that content out. We'll go create a user control called bullet 1. You can see that's now referenced at the top of my file. There's the control right there. I run my page. It'll work the same, but now all that content's in a user control. So once again, just trying to make web form stuff work better in the product. As my machine slowly thinks about it. Show one more quick thing here before I jump in and start showing some web form features. I do want to say that, as I was saying before, we're HTML5 compliant. So when we look at your doc type, we actually can then change the way IntelliSense works based on that doc type. So I now know that I'm HTML5. So if I start talking like an audio tag, I'll get an audio tag. That was spectacular. So I got my snippet that's put into the page here. So we know about audio. Once again, because of the HTML doc type, we also know about the video tag. We'll put a snippet in there for you for that. We understand that as well from, I can come over here, I can drag things in, and we'll automatically convert them to video tags. I can drag stuff in. We'll convert it to audio tags. So based on the content, we can, we're kind of smart with that stuff now. So we save that, and I want to show some web form stuff here. So let me go to the Solution Explorer. I've got this page here, and the idea behind this page is I've got a database here. Let me explain my database, and I'll drill into my database in a second. So an interesting thing as part of all these reorgs that have happened in the last couple of years is, as I said, when I first joined the company, I worked on the Asp Net team, and we had other teams that built similar products to ours. We had the WCF team, which built some of our WCF stuff for SOAP and stuff. We had the Indie Framework team, which built some of the database stuff. What's kind of neat about, as we moved, Scott Guthrie moved to Azure, and as he moved to Azure, Scott Guthrie is the vice president of the Azure division. As he moved to Azure, he went and took all the .NET pieces that he thought made sense in Azure and sucked us all together. So Indie Framework is part of my team, WCF is part of my team, and as part of that, we've had a lot of influence on WCF. So first of all, what I'm going to do is show model binding. And my database that I have here is I've got a POCO database. So in Indie Framework today, all I've got to do is write a class. I've got a class here with an employee ID. It knows that's my primary key. And I gave it a few fields, first name, last name, and phone. That's all I've got to do. There is one more class to make it turn into a database, and we call that a context. And so I've got a class that derives from DB context, and it's just got one property on it, employees, with a get and set. And that's enough for EF now to doing something we call code first, just build a database on the fly for me. So if I run this application, it'll create the database. But my page needs to reference that database. So I want to show a few things here. First off, we have what I was saying we call strongly typed data controls now. So I now set my control to have a data type. And by telling my control that I want that model's employee data type, it's now smart and actually knows about the fields in the control. The next thing is this feature I was calling model binding, which is in the past we've had these data source controls that auto-magically bind data to your server controls back and forth, and you don't really write the code. It's just kind of magic happens. We've kind of learned over the time that People actually want to write their own code for that. So I can just type select method here, and we're pretty smart. This is another web form feature. In the past, if I wanted to actually hook up an event, I would have to switch back to design mode to hook the event up. You might notice that as I type select method equals quote, quote, a new thing dropped down here saying, do you want to create the method? I'll select that. There's my method. If I go to my code behind file, it put my method in there for me. So not only did it put the method in there, but it's actually putting in there with a bunch of comments telling me how to actually write the method. Now, in my case, it's a very simple method. I just tell it that I want to, already got a context on my page. I want to see the employees. That basically tells Entity Framework to go out and grab all the employees from the database and bring them back in the page. I'll save that. I've got enough here now to data bind this. I want to show that in a data binding expression, because of that item type, I now get IntelliSense. In this case, I need to pass a thank you for that. Everybody else can applaud too. You now get IntelliSense as part of our data controls. This also means that you get compile errors as well. So if the data changes, you'll get a compile error. So let me copy this a few times. And so we're kind of moving away from that, the past of having these magical data controls to more of saying, you write your own code. Thank you very much for that. Visual Studio. So this is going to take a little bit of time here because it's going to actually go out and create a database on the fly for me. Thinking, thinking, thinking. So there my database is. And for fun, I'll put my information here, not my phone number. And I'll save this. That was great. Simple. Now, I'm a developer. There's a good chance that I'm going to change my data. And in the past, all the technologies, at least that we've had in the framework, have not been very good at this. So I'm going to bring up the Server Explorer. And I'm going to drill into my database and show that it created a database for me here. Here's my employee table. I'm speaking before it opens, so I'm praying. And there's my fields. And that's great. But what if I decide I want to add another field later? If you try to do this with any of our technologies today, you would have to go and like hand edit your database or go to erase your Entity Framework code inside of your project because the two things don't stay synchronized. So let's try this. I'm going to go over to my employee object here. And I want to show off more than that feature. I'm going to show a couple of features off. As part of being this model binding, this binding to an object instead of these data sources, I can now do validation on my model. So I'm going to go put some attributes on here. I think the first name should be required. I don't think you can put a record in without a first name. I think the last name should be required as well. And I'm going to add a prop. I'll add a date time, and we'll call it birth date, birthday. How about that? And I'll save that. Maybe birth date. And now I'm going to run my application. I haven't modified my application yet, but I'm going to run it. We'll go back to the employee page. And we could have either done something magical and just magically made your database sync up, or you'll get the yellow screen of death. And I got the yellow screen of death. My app's going, your model does not match your database. So how would I fix this? So we got this awesome feature. Sean told me yesterday that even though .NET Nuke uses its own different internal ORM, as writing plugins, you're more than welcome to use EF. So what I'm going to do is open up my PowerShell here, and I'm going to do something called Enable Migrations. Migrations is a great feature that allows you to keep your database and your code in sync. So I'm going to say Enable Migrations. And what's going to happen is typing this step, Visual Studio is going to go out and look at my database and look at my code and figure out what's going on there. It's working. Okay. I'll go back to my Solution Explorer. And I've now got, what the heck is this? It created this method called up. So what migrations basically does is it goes and looks at your database and then writes the code required to create the database into the state that it's currently in. So when I first ran this application, I had a first name, a last name, an ID, and a phone number. And so it created this first step called up, which creates a table with those fields. I can modify the source code. I could even write my own code in here to write SQL if I wanted to as well. It also created a down method, which will reverse that back out. Because I'm a developer, I might want to do something and then change my mind and go back. So that's great. So it's got this first step in, but I wanted to add that new column. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and I'll say update. I will say create migration. Or actually I will do add migration, how about that? And I will call it birth date. And it will complain. Love an audience. So what that'll do is now that it's created my first step, adding a migration will go add a new step that adds just that column. So you'll notice here that I've now got a new in my migrations folder, I've got a new class, birth date, and that's basically the step that adds the birthday column. And you might also notice that it also altered the column for first name and last name as well. When I added that required attribute, not only is it going to pass that validation information up to ASP.NET, it also was kind of a hint to the database that should be a non-nullable field in the database as well, because we don't allow empty fields there. So it creates these up and down steps. Now what I need to do, delete some of this stuff, is I need to run that step against my database. I'll run update database. Before I run update database, I actually want to show, it's got quite a few fields on it. One of them is script. If I say update database script, instead of actually running it against my database, it'll actually go create the SQL script required to make this change. And so if you're the kind of person that wants to modify your database by hand, you can run the script version of it. It'll create the script for you. There's my script that alters my tables, inserts some data into the migration history, so that's how we kind of know where we're at. I don't want that. I just wanted to show that we can do that. So if you're the person that likes to run your own database, you have that if you want. I'll just run update database again, but this time I'll remove the dash script. It'll go modify my tables. And all this database stuff that I'm showing also works with publishing. So if you actually take an ASP.NET application, publish it to the cloud, then go and do some of these migrations and publish it again. On the remote server, what we'll do is when you publish the second time, the next time, we'll go and run as many up steps as required to take your database up to the current level, or down steps if that was the case. So I've run that up. I'll do a refresh here. My birth date column shows up. I run my application, and I should not crash anymore. And so to me, I think it's pretty cool. This is the first time that we actually let you keep your code and database in sync and not have the whole thing blow up in your face and require you to figure out what those steps are. Come over here, my pages work. Let me jump back to that page, and I want to show a few more features that we have in web forms here. So to make this work, let me add the new field here. Call it birth date. And we'll call it birth date. So I've now modified my code to actually take advantage of that new field. And I'll come over here, and I'll try to put a record in without a first name or a last name, because I now mark those as required. We'll do 1/1/2011. I'll do insert, and I get validation on those fields. That validation required a postback, though, so that's not exactly what I really want. I don't want to require the postback. I want to have a client-side application. So another feature of .NET 4.5 is I can change these bound fields to, we'll change them to dynamic field. And by changing this to dynamic field, a dynamic field knows about these attributes on my model. And what a dynamic field will basically do is, when it sees these attributes, it will go out and find the ASP.NET controls required to do client-side validation for those and automatically inject those into my page. So all I've got to do is change these to dynamic field. And I'll show out why and how this works in a second. So now I'm running dynamic fields, and I'll start getting client-side validation as well. Won't be necessarily super easy to see, because I'm on a local machine here, but you do see the client-side validation error pop up right here. And while I'm thinking of that, I talked earlier about this feature called Unobtrusive Validation. So let's go look at the stuff that validation puts into your page. Here you go. Here is all the goop that validation puts into your page. I've got this nice CData block here with all this stuff. We gave MVC this great feature called Unobtrusive Validation, where we don't write that stuff into all that markup in. What we do is we take your HTML elements and we add some special attributes to them, and we have a JavaScript library that reads those attributes and does validation that way. That feature is actually on by default in .NET 4.5. I disabled it here just to show the old markup. I'll turn that off. Run this again. And when I do, the page content will be much smaller. You'll note that all that stuff that used to be here is now gone. So once again, we're just trying to make your pages smaller, run faster, all that kind of stuff. That's unobtrusive validation. So I've kind of showed how I could do model binding. I can have a database. As the database changes, I can create migration scripts. I can migrate. All kind of goes into a pretty cool story. And as I said, it's part of this idea of taking all the things that we could do in MVC and making them happen in web forms. There's one more thing I want to do. I was talking about HTML5 earlier. So let me shrink this window down a little bit, or not. I'm going to drag a folder in here. And what this folder does is, with that dynamic control, instead of actually having the markup built into ASP.NET where you can't change the markup of what our controls do, by adding this special folder in, I can now control the markup. So if I'm going to edit a date time field, this is the actual markup that we actually put in for that dynamic field. Here's the validators. That's how we do the validation, is when we see that dynamic field, we go find the type of data that you're looking at. We either on the fly generate this markup, or if you have the source version of the markup, you can actually edit these things. I want to show something else as well here. If you look at my text box, it's got this text mode equals date time. This is an HTML5 feature. Text mode equals date time means that we'll actually put the right markup in your page for an HTML5 compatible browser to show a date time picker. Now, what's funny is on the client, there are no date time pickers there's no browsers that do this yet. The browsers that all do this, support this today, are typically on mobile devices like phones and tablets. So as a result of that, I can show off one final thing over here. So what that means is when I run my page, and I run this page, if I look at the markup, I'm now going to be admitting on my date time field, give me a break. That is a race condition that's occurring in Visual Studio where it's actually running the project while there's a file in the project telling the project not to run. Okay, so if I go look at my markup here, and I find my datetime control buried somewhere in here, you will see that its type is now set to datetime right here. And as I said, on a mobile device, that means you'll get a datetime picker. And just for fun, all of our projects now ship with jQuery UI and all the components like that. I can actually write a little bit of markup, which I've already got in here, I hope. I wrote some JavaScript here that uses another library that we ship as part of our projects called Modernizer. Modernizer is a technology for looking at your browser and figuring out what its capabilities are. And I basically say if my browser is not capable of doing date types, then I'm going to automatically use some jQuery here to turn jQuery UI on as a date picker. And if I run, go to employ. We'll do create. And if I'm blessed, I get a datetime picker. So it shows you how easy it is to make your applications take advantage of HTML5, and then on browsers that don't support HTML5 fully, do that. One final thing to show before I jump and show Signalr is if I look at my source on that page was actually a great page. Go back to employ. And I click the create. You're going to see there's a lot of scripts and a lot of stuff that's included in the top of the page here. This application, all ASP.NET applications created with 4.5, take advantage of that new feature I was telling you about, which does all the compression and minification of scripts. If I just go to my config and change to release mode, turn debug off, when you're debugging, we turn the minification off because we want you to be able to step through scripts and stuff like that. So run one more time, go to employ. Go to create. All the script references have been compressed down into like 2 or 3, and I'm in good shape. So that's kind of showing how we've taken all the MVC features and folded them back into web forms and given you all the same things. You get the model binding that's strongly typed data, you get the unobtrusive JavaScript, you get the ability to put data validation on your data model, showing entity framework with code first. I can do migrations. It's a pretty sweet story. So now let me jump and I'll close this app out. And I want to show Signalr real quick. So Signalr is a product, as I was saying, we're going to ship it in December. You can actually get it today. If you just Google for Signalr, you'll find it's in GitHub. And to start off, I'm just going to run an app here. I'm going to show you. Run an app. And this is a chat app. If I'd actually published this to the cloud, we could all jump in this thing and chat together. And let me just stick this over here. I'll create another one. I'll stick this one over here. So I got two of these windows up. If I type into one window, it types into both windows. If I had 1,000 of these things hooked up, they would all type to each other. And so you might ask, how do I make it to be able to send a message to one window and have it go to all the windows? How much code does that actually take? That's where Signalr is really awesome, and I think .NET Nuke has a lot of opportunities for Signalr. In the case of Signalr, what I do is I have what we call a hub. And a hub is where messages come and where messages go. And my hub's got a simple method called send. And it takes a string, and then the magic happens here where I say clients dot. And on clients, so every time the send method is called, it says all the connected clients I want to call add message. And so let's go look at the source code of a file that consumes this. So there's a little bit of JavaScript here, but you're going to see it's pretty basic. So what's interesting here, notice on my chat, it calls add message. And then in my JavaScript, I've got an add message method that I hook up. Any method that you want to call from your C#, you just write the signature for that method in your JavaScript, and we will do the right magic to call into the client side of your application and call that method. So you can see I got a connection to my hub. I defined my add message. Basically, every time my message comes in, I'm going to go append it to this LI right here. And then I've got a button, and my button, I hook up an event on my button that calls chat.send. And if I go back over here, here is chat.send. And so what we're making it very simple to do is making it very simple from JavaScript to call a C# method in my hub. And I'm also making it very simple from C# to call any method in my JavaScript. And that's how Signalr wires itself up. And so I wrote chat in 3 lines of I would actually argue 1 line of C# and, I don't know, 10 lines of JavaScript. And scenarios I think that really are applicable to the .NET Nuke audience are if you've got your CMS up and you want to be able to send notifications to people that are actually in the CMS, that content's changed, that stuff's notifications that you got an email or whatever. That's what this technology is for, and it's designed to scale out and work to thousands and millions of clients. We're going to take Signalr a step further next year. We're going to actually wire all the data source control stuff I was just showing you guys where I could write an app and show data. What if real-time was part of Entity Framework and I actually had a real-time DB context? With that real-time DB context, when my database changes, I can send a notification to the client with potentially the change to the database, and the client can update in real time. And that's where we're going to take this technology next, is we're going to let you actually imagine being in .NET Nuke on your browser. And as somebody, the content author, changes the content, the page dynamically refreshes. Today, you probably have to press F5 in the browser to actually refresh. This would actually happen in real time. So we're looking at finding ways to add real time to everything. And so Signalr is really cool, and you can play with it today. I've got one more thing I want to show. And this is, I was showing Web API earlier as a mechanism for building these rich apps. And this is a template. I'm going to show you, this is a preview of something we're going to ship in December. We actually will have a preview of this out at Build. So I'm going to go to my Solution Explorer, and I've got what we call a to-do controller. And all it is a type that returns an API controller. An API controller is what Web API is all about. In my API, I just have these methods. So you can see I've got a post to do, somewhere I've got a delete, probably have a get in here somewhere as well. I'll have one over here. Here's my get. And what happens is you just write methods, and whatever your methods return, we convert that data to JSON for a client-side object to actually talk to. And so this is a simple to-do app. I don't want to drill into it too much, but I just want to show you what the outcome is going to be. Please don't try to run a file. So we're gonna start, starting as part of December, we're gonna have this notion of having projects in ASP.NET that we call single page applications. If you've been to Gmail, you've been to Hotmail, you've been to Twitter, you know what the idea of a single page application is. This is an app that never seems to leave the same page. It doesn't refresh, it just dynamically updates on the fly. So we're gonna build that into ASP.NET. Web API is the server part of that. We're using, in this example, I'm using Knockout.js, which is a data binding library inside that we've actually built as well. And I combine the two things together. And I get an app that's pretty slick, where I can just come in here, test, talk at I can add to-dos, and you see as I'm doing all these things, browser's not refreshing. It's all client-side, very clean. I can mark them as done. If I go look at my, my code required to do this, mainly it's writing that web API, and I've got some client-side goop here. If you're a JavaScript person, you'll probably get this. This is an area that we're, before December actually happens, we're gonna bring up some really cool tooling for this. I'm using Knockout, so this is basically saying for each of my to-dos, I want a checkbox, I want to bind it to the isDone property. I'm going to have a text input, bind it to the title. I'm going to decide, you know, if there's an error message, it'll show up there. If you look at this, it kind of looks like gobbledygook to me. What you're going to see us do in December timeframe is we are going to add full tooling for all of this. So you're going to see data binding expressions in Knockout.js actually have have colorization. You're going to see us add support for IntelliSense as part of these expressions as well. Our goal, probably over the next year, this is an area that we think is the future of the web. It's also where the tools are the weakest today. I have people ask me all the time, should I build apps like this? And I'm like, if you know JavaScript, you know CSS, you know all the stuff, yeah, you should do that. Starting in December, our first wave of tooling will happen. Starting next summer, our second wave of tooling will happen. And our goal is to make writing this type of application as easy as the web form stuff I was just showing earlier. Imagine if you could actually have JavaScript widgets, drag them off to your page, get nice data binding, just like I showed in the web form stuff. Here, with the same IntelliSense item.blah, your fields show up. That's where we're heading. As I said, this sample will be available in about 2 weeks at the Build Conference. You can download it off our website. So I think I'm close to out of time. I want to jump to final slide. If you want to email me, you can email me at scott.hunter@microsoft.com. I'm at Twitter at coolcsh. Websites that I think are really cool. This asp.net/vnext. If you want to go there, we've got a great document. I'll bring it up. It's kind of creepy. We have one of those animated GIFs today where you see the owl moving. If you go to Bing every day, about every 7th day, we have animated. There's an awesome video series of all the stuff we've added in .NET 4.5, and there's this huge, notice the size of the scroll bar. That's all the new stuff in .NET 4.5. As .NET Nuke users, I want to talk about .NET 4.5. .NET 4.5 is an in-place update, meaning that it replaces .NET 4. The new version of .NET Nuke is based on .NET 4, which means if you're using the version of .NET Nuke that's using .NET 4, and you put 4.5 on it, you know, you can actually, as part of your own modules or anything that you actually do, you can start taking advantage of .NET 4.5 features. It doesn't require the .NET Nuke guys to actually build one that necessarily targets 4.5. All you've got to do is put 4.5 on your box, and you can start taking advantage of 4.5 functionality in .NET Nuke today. So I showed a lot of stuff. I hope it was interesting. All the cool enhancements in Visual Studio for HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript. some great new tooling, this stuff that just makes sense, you know, closing tags and ending tags, matching, stuff like that. Showed a lot of the stuff that we did in web forms, making web forms have the same match up to MVC. You know, I want people in the room to understand that web forms and MVC and all of our libraries are still being, you know, the one ASP.NET, they're all being worked on. You can see this. By the way, this what's new does not contain MVC. So this is what's new in web forms. So just to let you know that we do have a huge commitment to web forms, and we're still trying to make it better, while we're trying to also start growing into a new space, which is the client-side space, talking to web APIs. So thank you guys very much. And thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. So we're actually running a little bit late. The next sessions are starting right now, but I think Scott will stay around if you guys want to come up and ask him some questions
Sure.
after.
I will be here.